To the Turn On Your Inner Light show. It's time to stop just surviving, and it's time to begin to thrive. It's time to live happier and healthier. Turn stress into strength. Noted author Debbie Mandel will show you how to move beyond personal doubts and fears and into positive perception to turn on your inner light. Here's your host, Debbie Mandel.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to my show. Our guest expert is DebbieNathan, an award-winning journalist, editor, and translator for over 3 decades, the author of 4 books, and her most recent is Sybil Exposed. Learn about the inside story of Sybil and her multiple personality disorder and how it was fabricated. You will never view psychiatry the same way again. Welcome, Debbie.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I never ask this question because it's so cliche, but in your case, I have to. Why'd you write this book?
Well, when I was a young woman in the early 70s, I guess that gives away my age, when I was 23, the book Sybil was a brand new book. It had just come out. I think my neighbor gave it to me. I really don't remember why I read it, but I was so taken by it. It's a book about a young woman who goes to a psychiatrist for various problems that she has, and she doesn't really know why she has those problems. And it comes out over the course of a lot of therapy that she's been horribly, horribly tortured sexually by her mother starting from when she was a baby. And she has split to deal with that, mentally split into 16 different personalities. You know, something about that just entranced me. And I couldn't get it off my mind, and I kept thinking, what would it be like? I mean, maybe that's happening to me. Maybe I don't even know when I'm splitting into another personality. It was sort of a very scary thought, but also in some way a very delicious thought, and it just haunted me. And, then I saw the movie in 1976, and I cried during the movie, and I was, again, very, very moved. And then later on in my journalism career in the 90s, I got interested in a lot of controversies about multiple personality disorder. There was a lot of doubt developing by then about whether it existed. And I think I just took this fascination that I had as a young woman into that later work and became really interested. I mean, I discovered that it wasn't just me who'd been fascinated. It was millions and millions of American women. The book Sybil sold 6 million copies right after it came out, and the movie was seen by about 1/5 of the American population when it came out in November 1976. And, I got really interested in why we were so entranced by a story that, as my research discovered, really was a fictional story. It wasn't true.
Yes, your book, Sybil Exposed, is a veritable page-turner. It was fascinating to read how I guess, coming to the crossroads where you have the psychiatrist and the writer and the patient in some kind of collusion about it. It was almost like the witches in Macbeth. I read it. Now, I think Sybil is a symbol of modern women. Do you see that at all?
I do see that, and I mean, I saw that first in myself. I had to ask myself, why? I mean, it's a crazy story, somebody splitting into 16 personalities. How crazy is that? But why was that so symbolic for me and for so many other people, my friends and millions of women? Primarily women were interested in this. I think the idea of splitting, you have to remember this book came out in the early 70s. And, the idea of splitting for women really resonated with what was going on then. We were in an early feminist period where we felt like we were ready to break a lot of glass ceilings all of a sudden, very quickly. All of a sudden it was okay to have sex outside of marriage. All of a sudden it was okay to demand the same jobs that men had. And at the same time that we were so brave and so excited, I think we were terrified. I know that I was. And I think back, for example, about being so scared about what my mother would think about how I was conducting my personal life. I wasn't getting married when I was 22. I had a boyfriend. We were living together. that was a very fraught situation in my family. I was becoming aware of sexual harassment. It was happening at my job, and I was furious. I was aware of people getting married, and they were still doing all the housework, even though they were going to work. So I think that this idea that this feeling that we were being pulled in all these different directions, this feeling of splitting and of having this great power to be so many different people and play so many different roles, and yet at the same time to be so frightened, I think that's exactly what was described in Sybil, and I think that that's why Sybil became so symbolic for us.
I see Sybil as a metaphor for what women are going through now, the fragmented self, where we do so many different things as caregivers at this stage of life. And
exactly. I don't think things have changed so much, really, since the book came out in 1973 or the movie in 76. And, you know, the other interesting thing I've noticed since the book came out, my own book, Sybil Exposed, I didn't talk very much about men's interest in multiple personality disorder because historically it's been there hasn't been that much compared to women. But a lot of people have approached me and said, what about men? You know, I know a guy who thinks that he's a multiple. And you know, I think that men also at this point are feeling fragmented. And the idea of being split into multiple personalities is actually becoming appealing to men as well, because these problems persist and even sort of spread through the entire population, the feeling of fragmentation.
And the notion of identity. When people lose their job in a recession, who am I if I don't do this work? My work identifies part of me, and we have an identity crisis throughout life, don't we? I mean, we die and get reborn. So, and I also think we wear masks. Women in particular wear masks to please others, and
yes, I think we're really socialized to do that, and I think that's part of Western culture that goes way back. But it's interesting that you mention, you know, the sort of the joblessness problem with the economy the way it is, because certainly the way that we are told that we can get another job or that we can solve this problem is to change jobs or change our idea of who we are. In other words, well, that industry that you were working in is obsolete now. It's all gone to another country. Now you're going to have to retool yourself and go out and learn a new way of working and rethink who you are.
Let's hold this thought. I don't want to rush it. It's very interesting. We're going to commercial break, and we will return with DebbieNathan and her book, Sybil Exposed.
Now you can take Debbie Mandel home with you. Her book, Turn On Your Inner Light, Fitness for Body, Mind, and Soul, will help you decompress with healthy, positive, concrete solutions. Common life challenges are presented so that you can quickly find the help you need. Emotional tips, original meditations, and a fun and easy-to-follow fitness workout for each mindset. This revolutionary new method will help you rewire mind and body to take back your power. Get it on Amazon.
Are you overwhelmed with the burden of taking care of children, parents, or both? Are you taking care of everyone else except yourself? It's time to change your habits and re-energize. Debbie Mandel gives you an innovative and easy-to-follow program for good health and happiness. In her magical new book, Changing Habits, The Caregiver's Total Workout, Debbie Mandel shows you step-by-step how to find the optimal balance between giving and receiving and guides you to exercise and eat right to take care of yourself. What are you waiting for? Read Changing Habits and start training for your life. Life does not need to be a burden. Get Changing Habits, The Caregiver's Total Workout on Amazon.
You're listening to the Turn On Your Inner Light show. I'm your host, Debbie Mandel, and I'm speaking with DebbieNathan, an award-winning journalist and author of Sybil Exposed. Now, before commercial break, Debbie, we were speaking about identity theft, so to speak, in quotation marks, and how in particular, I feel women go through this so painfully, where they have lost touch with the hidden girl within. Who am I? Where am I going with juggling all these roles? Is there substance to that within what you found?
I certainly found, I did a lot of archival work. There's a huge archive in New York City at a university of the papers of the journalist who wrote Sybil. And she saved hundreds of letters that people wrote to her after the book came out. It was really intriguing to see letters from young women who were taken by the book, so deeply taken by the book Sybil. And they would say things like, I've just finished college. You have to remember this is in the 70s. I've just finished college. I want to be a mathematician because that's what I want to do to be a new woman, but I don't really want to be a mathematician. I mean, reading Sybil made me realize that that's not me, and I don't know what me is, but I love the book Sybil because it made me realize that I could have many selves. Now I just have to go find those selves and find the true self. I mean, the depth of emotion in these letters. Another young woman said, I sometimes feel like a hippie, and I just want to have a carefree life and have a lot of free love. But on the other hand, I want to get married and just be a real straight-laced person. And there were so many letters where people just were trying so hard to figure out who they were, and the notion of a woman having 16 personalities, as horrible as it was, because she'd been tortured according to the book. And by the way, for listeners, that wasn't true. She hadn't been tortured. But to read a story about a woman who'd been tortured as a child, and yet, to think that the 16 personalities she developed were inspiring, which is the way a lot of women reacted, I think shows the depths of confusion that women felt then. And, we still do in many ways.
Yes, we definitely still do. And I think women... and I wrote a book called Addicted to Stress, and that's, to me, keeping so busy that I don't have to think about my unhappiness or any deficits in my own personality. So I can see how there's a golden thread between the time when Sybil was written and in our time period today. Now, do you think that Dr. Wilbur, the psychiatrist here, was sadistic, like she was the dominant and she had a submissive under her, and the narcissism that drove her to enact this scenario of multiple personality disorder?
Well, I don't want to psychoanalyze her. I'm just a journalist, but I do know, and what readers would see about her life in my book, is that she was a very smart little girl, and she came from a very ambitious family of men, and she wanted to be somebody, and she was a child actually around World War I, and a young woman during World War II. This was a time when women couldn't get anywhere. I mean, women doctors, there were very few of them, and they didn't really get very far. And I think she had a very strong, willful personality, and she was very frustrated. She wanted to be a pioneer in psychiatry. And, without psychoanalyzing her, I think that she was a strong-willed person, very ambitious, frustrated in her ambition. She found a sort of passive, dependent young woman to be her patient, and she gave her a diagnosis. And I don't think that she was deliberately trying to be mean or sadistic. She gave her a diagnosis that she believed in because she wanted that diagnosis to be hers. She wanted to present it to the world. And she really hurt her patient. I mean, she hurt her patient tremendously over a period of many years. But I wouldn't say that she did it deliberately. But
she did give her dosages of drugs that were mind-boggling. I mean, I went through your account. So how could that not be sadistic?
I think she felt that she was a pioneer. She was experimenting with medications because she had this idea that she was going to break the boundaries of what was known about these medications. But you also have to remember that during the time she was giving her uppers, downers, upper-downer combinations, antipsychotics, these medications were being given in smaller doses to women. I mean, if you had a problem and you went to your family doctor or to your psychiatrist, you would get all of these medications, just in smaller doses.
Well, as a scientist, as she liked to think of herself, didn't she see the correlation? I, as a layman, certainly do. So to me, there's this aspect of that's gross experimentation with the physical side effects that were horrible.
Well, I have to say that as I wrote this, as I did the research, we're talking about the 1950s and the 1960s, and we're talking about the way patients were treated, and particularly women. I came to believe that I probably scratched just the surface. There were probably many people doing what she did. You know, she wasn't operating in a vacuum. She had a practice on Park Avenue in New York City. She had colleagues that she talked to. I don't know whether she told them exactly what she was doing, but I always had the sense that she probably came out of a milieu that needs to be studied more, what was really going on there with medications during the Mad Men period.
And I think that's very relevant to me today because of the medicalization of America. Here's a pill for you, with drug companies advertising on TV, people skipping along the beach, and if I take this serotonin reuptake, I'm going to feel so much happier. I think that and then all the supplements that we take, right, Debbie? Because some of them can hasten death. But we go to commercial break, and we will return with Debbie Nathan, author of Sybil Exposed.
Dear listeners, I'm excited to tell you about my new book, Addicted to Stress. This is the message you need to hear. Are you addicted to stress? Do you do it all while everyone depends on you? Where's all this pressure coming from? It is coming from inside you. This is why my publisher, John Wiley, asked me to write Addicted to Stress, a woman's 7-step program to reclaim joy and spontaneity in life. This fun-to-read book teaches proven strategies to reclaim your life, silence your inner critic, build a healthy body, and reframe your thoughts to change your life for the better. Dare to be happy without the guilt. Addicted to Stress is easy to get. It's available at Barnes & Noble and other fine bookstores everywhere. You can also buy it at Amazon and other online retailers.
We're back with Debbie Nathan, author of Sybil Exposed. You know, what I found fascinating in the book was also the way therapists were leading their patients later on to rediscover all these sexual abuse scenarios that they had as children, and many were bogus. And I could see how the seed germinated based on this.
Yes, that was a big problem as this diagnosis exploded in the late 70s through the 1980s. A lot of people went to therapy with, the pretty typical problems that we have as women with depression, with eating issues. And women would go see therapists who had fallen in love with the multiple personality disorder diagnosis, and they would be told, the fact that you're overweight, that could be that you were sexually abused as a child. Do you remember anything like that? And if the patient said no, then the therapist would continue to push it, would perhaps use hypnosis, would even use other kinds of medications, and continued questioning. And, in a subset of the population, when you have that kind of suggestion and you're really trying to please your therapist because you want to get better, then people will start to remember things that probably didn't happen. And after a while, thousands and thousands of people in this country were having those memories, which were called recovered memories. That's a very controversial notion, whether there is such a thing. And they would accuse their parents, and they would break with their parents, and they would tell their elderly parents they could never see the grandchildren again. Some of them would take their parents to court, even on criminal charges. And it really created a crisis. And at that point, multiple personality disorder came under some really heavy critical examination. And actually, the recovered memory controversy, which, you know, was really all over the place. I remember when Oprah and Sally Jesse, you know, they would have people on talking about their recovered memories, and then all of a sudden, Oprah and Sally Jesse and the rest of them were skeptical. That happened in the mid-90s.
I think that it just shows you when we go to a physician, whether it be for a physical ailment or I don't want to use the word mental necessarily, or an emotional issue, that we have to really step back and be a journalist. Don't you agree?
I do agree, and I think it's so much easier to do that. You don't have to be a journalist. Maybe back in the 50s and 60s you would have had to be a journalist. But now we have the Internet. We have all kinds of really good, reputable medical advice entities online. You know, it's so much easier now to get critical data and information about diagnoses and to identify which diagnoses are controversial, which ones are kind of outliers, and you know, even with depression, here's a good example. I mean, that's a mainstream diagnosis, and yet, if you're paying any attention on the web, you know, you will see that there's a lot of really good research questioning the efficacy of antidepressants, as you mentioned earlier. And, you know, that's a mainstream diagnosis. You know, some of the other ones, like multiple personality, are much more controversial. So I do believe that we live in a time now where it's possible for people to go out and get information that they need to make good decisions about what's good therapy or good treatment and what's sketchy treatment.
I think depression in itself is a good point that you bring up, because it's been overdiagnosed. I like to see some of it called happiness deficit disorder. I mean, to me, when we're, and I say be a journalist because there's a lot of false and misinformation on the internet. You really got to sort it out and do your due diligence and research and get this broad spectrum so you get a more objective picture, as opposed.
Well, yeah, I agree, and I think that goes beyond medical questions. That's a question of what kind of literacy that we all need now. We need to understand how information works on the internet, whether we're exploring political questions, medical questions. You know, we need to understand, and I know they're teaching kids in college this now as a part of sophisticated literacy. How do you go on the web and figure out
our time,
good information, what's not?
Our time has passed, and this is a perfect note to end. Do you have a website where we can learn more about your work, DebbieNathan?
If you go to SybilExposed.com, it'll shoot you over to a lot of material about that work.
Well, kudos to you. I learned a lot from the book, and I'm happy to have read it. It made me a more alert person, and I will try to put the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in me together.
Okay, good luck.
Be well. Affirmation of the week. Free will means ridding yourself of the conditioning you absorbed as a child. When it comes to treating cartilage tears in athletes, platelet-rich plasma therapy is a safe and effective method of treatment, according to research presented at the American Orthopedic Society for Sports Medicine. As you can tell, we're in our latest medical trends. A surprise win or loss impacts future risk-taking. People appear to decrease their risk-taking levels after experiencing any surprising outcome, even positive ones, according to research from Case Western University. Moving more can lead to a longer life. If most people spent less than 3 hours a day sitting, it would add 2 years to the average life expectancy in this country. And if they cut the time they spent on the couch watching TV to less than 2 hours a day, it would add about 1.4 years to overall life expectancy, according to research from the Pennington Biomedical Center in Baton Rouge. But the question is, what kind of life would I have? And there's quality of life. And when you're adding on 1.5 years, will I be decrepit and pray for death? So let's add it on to the earlier part of life. A dog could be a baby's best friend, according to a study in the medical journal Pediatrics. Infants living in households with dogs were healthier and had fewer ear infections than those without a dog, the study found. Well, I have a dog, so I'm happy to hear that. And then, in studies regarding the H1N1 vaccine, the good news is there were no adverse outcomes to infants who were exposed to the vaccine in utero. There were no major birth defects, preterm birth, or fetal growth restriction. However, the Guillain-Barré syndrome affected adults, some of them, who got the shots. Well, you have to pick your poison. Well, we come to the close of another show. I have an educational website, totally free, turnonyourinnerlight.com, where all the radio shows with the guest experts are archived for your listening pleasure. You just go into the site and it'll take you right into YouTube. Subscribe to my free newsletter and you will be emailed an alert that the radio shows are up. New ones, a fresh new article on stress management, and all the health tips, the ones I didn't get to even touch upon, fully delineated and emailed to you from turnonyourinnerlight.com. Well, have a wonderful week and see you on the radio.